A 1-year-old baby, hungry and alone, wandering through rooms where her mother lay dead. Shamiya Griffin, just 20 years old, had been shot 12 times in her own home while her daughter slept in another room.
A woman is now dead after a shooting in Baldwin. Police say they found 20-year-old Shamiya Griffin in an apartment on Young Ridge Drive on Friday afternoon. We're still working to find more information on this.
We treated him like family, like he was at the family dinners, and anytime there was a birthday, he was there. He wanted us to find her like that. He wanted us to find my niece soiled in her diaper and my sister lifeless on her bed.
It's 3 in the morning in Baldwin, Pennsylvania, and something is terribly wrong. A baby's cries pierce through the silence of apartment walls, growing more desperate with each passing hour. For hours, 8 hours, 13 hours of nonstop crying that neighbors can no longer ignore. When police finally force their way into the apartment, they discover a scene that will haunt this community forever. A 1-year-old baby, hungry and alone, wandering through rooms where her mother lay dead. Shamiya Griffin, just 20 years old, had been shot 12 times in her own home while her daughter slept in another room. The person responsible for this brutal murder didn't just walk away and disappear. No, he did something far more twisted. He showed up at Shamiya's funeral, sat among her grieving family, and cried real tears while they comforted him in their darkest hour. Stay tuned as we reveal everything about this case. Drop a comment and let me know what you think about this story. Your instincts might save someone's life, just like those neighbors who couldn't ignore that baby's cries. Welcome to our channel. Please like this video, share and subscribe to this channel to help raise awareness and spread caution. Let's begin. This is the story of Shamiya Griffin, a young mother whose life was stolen by someone she trusted. Someone who looked her family in the eye at her funeral, knowing exactly what he had done, and how investigators pieced together a web of evidence that would expose one of the most calculating killers you'll ever hear about. The question isn't just who killed Shamiya Griffin. It's how someone could live with themselves after committing such an act, and then have the audacity to mourn publicly for the very person they murdered. At 20 years old, Shamiya was building something special for herself and her daughter. She wasn't just another young mom struggling to get by. She was an entrepreneur with real ambition, creating content on TikTok and YouTube that resonated with thousands of followers. Her social media presence showed a young woman full of life, always smiling, always pushing forward despite the challenges of single motherhood. Shamiya lived in Baldwin, Pennsylvania, a community where neighbors knew each other's names and looked out for one another. She had that rare combination of street smarts and genuine warmth that drew people to her. Friends describe her as someone who could light up any room she walked into, but who also had the business sense to turn her social media following into real opportunities. But perhaps most importantly, Shamiya was a devoted mother. Her 1-year-old daughter wasn't just the center of her world. She was her motivation for everything. Every post she made, every business venture she pursued, every decision she made was filtered through one question. What's best for my baby? Her relationship with Adil and Atangwa, the father of her child, appeared stable from the outside. Social media posts showed them together at family gatherings, celebrating birthdays, looking like any other young couple navigating parenthood together. They had broken up romantically, but maintained what seemed like a functional co-parenting relationship for their daughter's sake. This wasn't a woman living in fear or hiding from an abusive relationship. This was a young entrepreneur and loving mother who believed she had successfully navigated the tricky waters of co-parenting with an ex-boyfriend. She was building her brand, raising her daughter, and planning for a future that would never come. The tragic irony is that Shamiya Griffin was exactly the kind of young woman we should all be rooting for. She was taking responsibility for her life, working hard to create opportunities, and prioritizing her child's well-being above everything else. She represented hope, proof that young mothers could overcome obstacles and build something meaningful. That's what makes what happened next so particularly cruel. This wasn't random violence or a robbery gone wrong. This was someone who knew exactly who Shamiya was, understood her dreams and fears, and chose to destroy it all anyway. Around 3 a.m., 12 gunshots shattered the silence of the apartment complex. 12 bullets fired into a 20-year-old woman who should have been safe in her own home. The violence was swift and decisive. This wasn't a crime of passion or a struggle that escalated. This was execution-style brutality that left no room for survival. In the next room, Ramia's baby daughter slept through the gunshots that ended her mother's life. When she woke up, she was alone in an apartment with her mother's body, too young to understand what had happened, too young to call for help. What followed was 13 hours of a baby crying for her mother who would never answer. 13 hours of increasing desperation from a child who didn't understand why Mama wouldn't come when she cried. 13 hours that would haunt the neighbors who heard those cries long after the case was solved. The baby wandered through the apartment, hungry and confused, looking for the person who had never failed to comfort her before. She had access to her room, but the rest of the apartment had become a crime scene she was too innocent to comprehend. Meanwhile, neighbors in the surrounding apartments began to notice something was wrong. The crying wasn't the usual fussing of a toddler. It was continuous, desperate, the sound of a child in genuine distress. Hour after hour, the crying continued without any apparent response from inside the apartment. Some neighbors initially assumed Ramiya was dealing with a sick child or perhaps had stepped out briefly. But as the hours stretched on, concern grew into alarm. This wasn't normal. Something was definitely wrong. By the time concerned neighbors contacted police, that baby had been alone with her mother's body for more than half a day. Officers who responded to the scene would later say the sound of that child crying was something they'd never forget. Not because it was loud, but because of the desperation behind it. When police forced entry into the apartment, they found a scene that veteran officers described as particularly brutal. Ramiya Griffin lay dead from multiple gunshot wounds, while her daughter, unharmed physically but traumatized in ways too deep to measure, was finally rescued from a nightmare she was too young to understand. The apartment itself told a story of sudden violence. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that Ramiya had any warning of what was coming. This wasn't a burglary or a random break-in. This was someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to let into her home at 3 a.m. The timeline was becoming clear. Sometime around 3 a.m., someone Ramiya knew and trusted had walked into her apartment and murdered her in cold blood, then left her baby daughter alone to fend for herself. The question wasn't just who had done this. It was how someone could commit such an act and then simply walk away, leaving an innocent child in such circumstances. Within hours of discovering Ramiya's body, detectives knew they were dealing with someone close to the victim. The 3 a.m. timing, the lack of forced entry, and the precision of the attack all pointed to someone familiar with Ramiya's routines and living situation. The investigation moved quickly, focusing on the most obvious suspects. People in Ramiya's inner circle who had access to her apartment and knowledge of her schedule. At the top of that list was Adil Ntongwa, her ex-boyfriend and the father of her child. Investigators began building their case methodically. They canvassed the neighborhood for witnesses who might have seen or heard something unusual that night. They pulled phone records to track communication patterns and location data. They examined social media posts and text messages to understand the dynamics of Ramiya's relationships. The evidence began pointing in one direction. Neighbors reported seeing a familiar figure near Ramiya's apartment complex around the time of the murder. Security cameras in the area captured footage that investigators found highly significant, though they kept specific details confidential during the active investigation. Forensic evidence from the crime scene provided additional pieces of the puzzle. Ballistic analysis of the 12 bullets recovered from the scene, fingerprint evidence, and DNA analysis all contributed to building a comprehensive picture of what happened that night. What emerged was a timeline that placed Adil Ntongwa at or near the crime scene during the window when Ramiya was murdered. Investigators found his story about his whereabouts that night inconsistent and unsupported by the physical evidence they had collected. The motive remained complex. While Ramiya and Ntongwa had broken up romantically, they were supposed to be co-parenting their daughter effectively. Friends and family hadn't observed any obvious signs of escalating conflict that would predict such extreme violence. However, investigators discovered that beneath the surface of their apparently amicable co-parenting relationship, there were deeper tensions. Financial stress, Disagreements about child custody arrangements and personal conflicts had been building in ways that weren't immediately visible to their social circle. Within days of the murder, investigators had gathered enough evidence to identify Etongwa as their primary suspect. They obtained warrants for his arrest on charges of criminal homicide and endangering the welfare of a child, the latter charge relating to leaving Ramia's baby alone in the apartment for over 13 hours after the murder. Even as police were gathering evidence against him, Adil Etongwa was preparing to attend Ramia Griffin's funeral, where he would display grief and emotion while comforting the very family members whose daughter he had allegedly murdered. He attended her funeral. Let that sink in for a moment. The person responsible for ending Ramia's life sat in that funeral home, surrounded by her grieving family and friends, and performed the role of mourning ex-boyfriend and concerned father. But he didn't just attend. He actively participated in the grief. Etongwa cried real tears. He displayed genuine-looking emotion. He accepted comfort from Ramia's family members who had no idea they were consoling their daughter's alleged killer. Ramia's sister, Mariah Griffin, later described the scene in terms that capture the full horror of the deception. Family members actually approached Etongwa during the funeral to comfort him, believing he was struggling with the loss of someone he had loved and the mother of his child. He kept to himself. He sat down and didn't say anything, Mariah recalled. The family interpreted his quiet demeanor as shock and grief, natural responses to losing someone important. They had no reason to suspect that his silence might have been the calculated behavior of someone hiding an enormous secret. The psychological manipulation involved in this act is staggering. Etongwa had to sit through eulogies celebrating Ramia's life, knowing he had ended it. He had to watch her family and friends share memories and express their devastation, knowing he was responsible for their pain. He had to accept their sympathy and support while hiding the fact that he was allegedly the very person who had destroyed their lives. What makes this even more calculated is that Etongwa reached out to the family after the murder, offering support and expressing his own grief. Mariah later reflected on this outreach with anger and disbelief. For you to reach out, it's like, what are you trying to cover? You thought that you were going to get away with killing my sister. This wasn't just attending a funeral to avoid suspicion. This was active manipulation of grieving family members for his own protection. He was using their love for Ramia and their natural compassion as a shield to deflect suspicion from himself. What do you think drives someone to attend their victim's funeral? Share your thoughts. This behavior baffles criminal psychologists who study these cases.
I felt angry because, like I said, you knew what you did, and for you to reach out, it's like, what are you trying to cover? You thought that you were going to get away with killing my sister.
Mariah Griffin says her sister Remy and Adeline Etongwa were together about 4 years. In this picture, the two expecting parents were all smiles. Sometime after their daughter was born, they separated, yet maintained what Mariah thought was a civil relationship in the spirit of co-parenting.
What happens behind closed doors really don't get spoke of much, but, there were some things that I've heard, and it, kind of raised an eyebrow.
Mariah described Etongwa as a shady person and controlling, but she respected the fact that her sister still had love for him. And the night she found out Remy had been killed, Mariah said Etongwa needed to know as soon as possible.
He was sounding normal, so in my head, I'm like, he doesn't know what happened. So I didn't want to be the one to tell him what happened. Looking back, it's like he knew what happened.
The news of Etongwa's arrest reached Mariah today as she and her mom were on their way to a custody hearing for Remy's daughter. Now Mariah's even more determined to ensure her niece is placed in the right home, one that is a reflection of the love Remy embodied.
She was the one you would call when you needed help, when you needed a shoulder to cry on. She was the one. We have part of our justice, but we didn't get all of it yet.
The fact that he could maintain this deception while surrounded by the genuine grief of people who loved Ramia speaks to a level of emotional coldness that most people find incomprehensible. He watched Ramia's family mourn, knowing he had caused their pain, and successfully convinced them to comfort him in their darkest hour. This aspect of the case adds a layer of psychological horror that goes beyond the physical violence of the murder itself. It's one thing to kill someone in a moment of rage or desperation. It's another entirely to attend their funeral and manipulate their family's grief for your own protection. The murder of Shamiya Griffin forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about violence in relationships and the masks that dangerous people can wear. This case offers several critical lessons that could potentially save lives if we're willing to learn from this tragedy. First, we need to understand that domestic violence doesn't always look like what we expect. Shamiya and Etongwa weren't in an obviously abusive relationship. They had broken up and were supposedly co-parenting successfully. The violence came without clear warning signs that friends and family could recognize. This reminds us that intimate partner violence can emerge even in relationships that appear functional from the outside. Second, the case highlights the importance of trusting our instincts and speaking up when something feels wrong. Those neighbors who called police after hearing 13 hours of baby crying potentially saved that child's life. Their willingness to get involved, even when they weren't certain what was happening, made the difference between rescue and further tragedy. Third, we must recognize that people capable of extreme violence can also be capable of extreme deception. The image of Etongwa crying at Shamiya's funeral while her family comforted him should serve as a permanent reminder that manipulative individuals can exploit our natural compassion and empathy. The ability to commit murder and then convincingly perform grief reveals a level of emotional disconnection that most of us struggle to comprehend. For parents, this case offers a sobering reminder about the importance of carefully evaluating the people we allow into our children's lives. Shamiya trusted Etongwa because he was her daughter's father, but that biological connection doesn't guarantee safety or good intentions. Finally, Shamiya's story reminds us to value and protect the young entrepreneurs, content creators, and ambitious people in our communities. She represented hope and determination, someone building something positive despite challenges. When we lose people like Shamiya, we lose more than just individuals. We lose the potential for positive change and inspiration they represent. The most important lesson from this tragedy may be that evil rarely announces itself. It often wears familiar faces, attends funerals, and successfully manipulates our emotions. Staying safe requires not just awareness of obvious threats, but understanding that the most dangerous people are often those who seem the most normal. As this case moves through the legal system, Adil and Etongwa faces serious charges, including criminal homicide and endangering the welfare of a child. The evidence against them appears substantial, built on witness testimony, physical evidence, and digital forensics that investigators believe conclusively link him to Shamiya's murder. The legal proceedings will ultimately determine Etongwa's guilt or innocence, but the impact of this case extends far beyond whatever verdict is reached. Shamiya Griffin's death has sparked important conversations in her community about domestic violence, the warning signs we might miss, and the importance of supporting young mothers who are trying to build better lives for themselves and their children. The case has also highlighted the incredible work of the law enforcement officers and investigators who solved this crime quickly and thoroughly. Their dedication to getting justice for Shamiya and protection for her daughter demonstrates the best of what we expect from our justice system. Perhaps most importantly, Shamiya's story serves as a reminder that behind every crime statistic is a real person with dreams, plans, and people who love them. She wasn't just another victim. She was a young entrepreneur, devoted mother, and beloved family member whose life had value that extended far beyond the circumstances of her death. Subscribe if stories like this remind you why we need to look out for each other. Which case should we cover next? Your suggestions help us shine light on stories that need to be told and victims who deserve to be remembered. The memory of Shamiya Griffin lives on not just in the daughter she left behind, but in the lessons her story teaches us about recognizing danger, supporting each other, and never taking for granted the young people in our communities who are working to build something better. Her legacy is a call to action, to be more aware, more supportive, and more determined to protect the people around us who are vulnerable to those who would exploit their trust. Justice for Shamiya means more than just convicting her killer. It means learning from her story, protecting other young mothers in similar situations, and creating communities where people like her can thrive safely. That's the kind of justice that would truly honor her memory.